So, what if a huge part of what we've been told about cancer is, well, incomplete? Today, we're diving into a really radical idea called the metabolic theory of cancer.
1600 persone al giorno in questo paese muoiono di cancro. 600.000 all'anno muoiono di cancro. E il numero aumenta ogni anno. Quindi pensi che questi esperti...
It's a perspective that challenges decades of scientific thinking and honestly offers a totally new way to look at one of the world's most feared diseases. To really get why a new perspective is so important, we have to start with a pretty sobering number. In the US alone, cancer takes 600,000 lives every year.
1600 persone al giorno in questo paese muoiono di cancro. 600.000 all'anno muoiono di cancro. E il numero aumenta ogni anno. Quindi pensi che questi esperti...
That's more than 1,600 people every single day. And here's the part that's really troubling. Despite billions of dollars poured into research, that number isn't dropping. It's actually rising. Now get your head around this staggering idea. It comes from the work of Nobel laureate Otto Warburg from almost 100 years ago. The idea that the vast majority of cancers are preventable. Now, if that's even a little bit true, it makes you ask a really uncomfortable question, right? Are we missing something fundamental about what cancer actually is and where it comes from? That's the big question we're going to dig into today as we explore the thinking behind this provocative idea. Okay, first things first. To really understand this new idea, we need to do a quick refresh on the old one, the theory that has pretty much dominated cancer research for the last half century. And that's the idea that cancer is, at its core, a disease of our genes. So, the mainstream view for the last 50 years has been this. Cancer gets started because of random mutations in a cell's DNA. These bad genes then basically hijack the cell, causing it to grow and divide out of control until it forms a tumor. It's a neat theory, but there's a growing number of scientists who think it's just not the whole picture. And that brings us to the challenger, the metabolic theory of cancer. This isn't just a minor update. It's a completely different origin story for the disease. And the leading voice for this theory, Dr. Thomas Seyfried, makes an incredibly bold claim. He says that if we just correctly identify cancer as a metabolic disease, we could slash the death rate by more than half in just 5 years. That's a huge statement. So the big question is, what on earth does he mean by metabolic? And this slide right here, this gets to the absolute heart of the disagreement. The genetic theory says bad genes are the cause. They come first. The metabolic theory just flips that completely on its head. It argues that the real problem, the starting point, is broken machinery inside the cell. And those genetic mutations we see in cancer, they're just a downstream symptom, an effect, not the cause. So if the problem isn't our genes, then what is it? Well, according to this theory, it all starts inside the tiny little power plants that are in every single one of our cells. Yep, the mitochondria. You might remember them from high school biology as the powerhouses of the cell, and that's exactly what they are. Every single breath of oxygen you take is used by these little organelles to generate the energy that powers everything your body does. They are absolutely essential for a healthy, functioning cell. According to the theory, here's the chain of events. It's a cascade. First, something damages the mitochondria. This basically cripples their ability to make energy using oxygen. So the cell, to survive, flips on a really primitive backup system called fermentation. Think of it like burning sugar without oxygen. And here's the kicker. It's this desperate switch that unlocks the uncontrolled growth that we call cancer. You know, what's wild is that this isn't some new discovery. This metabolic switch has a name, the Warburg Effect. It's named after the very same Otto Warburg we quoted earlier. Way back in the 1920s, he noticed that cancer cells have this really bizarre obsession with fermenting sugar, even when there's plenty of oxygen around. So what's messing up our mitochondria in the first place? Well, the sources point to a whole list of things that are frankly way too common in our modern world. We're talking about chemical carcinogens, radiation, chronic inflammation, certain viruses, and yeah, even just the natural process of aging. All these things can disrupt the delicate machinery of our little cellular power plants. Okay, but this is where the story gets really hopeful, because if cancer is a disease of a broken metabolism that needs a very specific type of fuel, then maybe, just maybe, we can manage it by targeting that fuel. The research points to two main fuels that drive the growth of pretty much all cancers: the sugar glucose and an amino acid called glutamine. Because their normal power plants are busted, cancer cells become totally dependent on these two fuels to survive and grow.
So the strategy becomes about cutting off the supply line, and that involves three main approaches. You've got the ketogenic diet, which drastically lowers your glucose; caloric restriction, which just reduces the total amount of fuel available; and then practices like intermittent fasting, which can actually help repair and improve how well your mitochondria work over time. So what does this actually look like on your plate? Here's a pretty simplified guide. The idea is to shift to healthy fats and vegetables that aren't starchy, with a moderate amount of protein. But the most important part, according to this theory, is what you avoid: processed carbs and sugars, things like bread, pasta, and sugary drinks, which basically provide the glucose that fuels that broken fermentation process. And this brings us to the final, and maybe the most empowering piece of this whole puzzle. This isn't just a theory about treating a disease, it's a way of thinking about prevention. It connects our day-to-day choices directly to the health of our cells. The source material makes this really striking point. In populations that still eat traditional, low-carb, ancestral diets, cancer is virtually non-existent. That seems like a pretty powerful clue that there's a strong link between our modern diet and the rise of this disease. And this slide really just sums up the modern problem, doesn't it? It's this combination of processed foods, sitting around too much, and chronic stress. All of these things create an environment inside our bodies that puts our cellular power plants at risk, day in and day out. What's so amazing, though, is that this approach doesn't just target one thing. The source material tells the story about a man who didn't just reverse his cancer, but also his type 2 diabetes and his high blood pressure. When you improve your metabolic health, you get these huge system-wide benefits for almost all chronic diseases. And so we end up right back where we started, with a really powerful question. If this theory is right, if cancer is a metabolic disease, doesn't that mean prevention is a metabolic choice? It kind of reframes cancer not as a random stroke of bad luck, but as a predictable result of a metabolic breakdown. And it suggests that prevention isn't some big mystery, but a series of choices we each have the power to make every single day.